I'm Dave Oberg, Executive Director of the Elmhurst History Museum. It is my pleasure to present to you From Prairie to Treetown, Tales of Old Elmhurst. We're going to be exploring our community's historic roots from a tiny settlement on the prairie to the modern city we know today. Now, I'll be focusing on some of the people and important developments that help shape our community. But before I do that, I should note that long before Elmhurst, many people called this area home. Since the end of the Ice Age, people have been drawn to this region, looking to the natural environment to provide for the needs of a multitude of families in different communities. In fact, Euro-American communities like Elmhurst represent merely 2% of human habitation in this area. It is humbling to think of the many different peoples who called this land home over the vast sweep of human history. Among the last of those peoples who farmed, hunted, and fished near present-day Salt Creek were the Potawatomi. In 1830, northeastern Illinois boasted at least 26 Potawatomi villages, including 4 near present-day Elmhurst. Pypegee, son of Shabbona, an important Potawatomi leader, dwelt along the banks of Salt Creek with his wife Winnewalla and dubbed the creek Lovely Little River. Shabbona, Pypegee, Winnewalla, and the Potawatomi would be forcibly removed from the land in the years following the end of the Black Hawk War and the Treaty of Chicago. The settlers who followed would be drawn to the area for the same reasons as the Potawatomi. Rich soil, good hunting, and fresh water provided by a local creek, first dubbed the Little Des Plaines River and later Salt Creek, made the site ideal to build a community. A Native American trail linking Lake Michigan to the Fox River Valley ran along the south edge of the settlement we call home today. That trail, now called St. Charles Road, was a thoroughfare for countless generations before us. In the spring of 1842, Gerry Bates purchased a large lot about a half-mile west of present-day York Street, spanning from St. Charles Road to the present location of North Avenue. Bates returned to Ohio and sent his brother-in-law, John Hovey, to take possession of the property and build the Hill Cottage Tavern near St. Charles Road at the 16-mile mark from Chicago. The tavern became a regular stop for the Frink and Wagner stagecoach line, and Hovey petitioned for a postal route for the busy Hill Cottage Tavern. Well, the Postmaster General agreed, designated Hovey as local postmaster. Now, as there were numerous postal villages at that time, beginning with the word Hill, the Postmaster General suggested Hill Cottage be inverted to Cottage Hill, giving the fledgling community its first name of Cottage Hill. In 1845, Gerry Bates returned to Cottage Hill, succeeding Hovey as local postmaster. 2 years later, as the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad began laying track west from Chicago, Bates offered the railroad the right-of-way through his property in return for locating a depot across from his home and store, which is about a half-mile north of St. Charles Road. The Galena and Chicago Railroad tracks reached Cottage Hill 2 years later with a locomotive Pioneer pulling into town July 4th, 1849. The tiny community was now firmly stitched to Chicago and the other developing communities along the rail line. Locals could reach the city of Chicago in an hour or less instead of lurching for hours along the rutted and often muddy St. Charles Road. While the Galena and Chicago Union eventually folded, the Chicago Northwestern Railroad and later the Union Pacific acquired the right-of-way. And today, those tracks are among the busiest in the nations, bisecting North and South Elmhurst and linking commuters to Chicago and the western suburbs. With the arrival of the railroad, Cottage Hill began to grow and flourish. By the mid-1850s, the community boasted a hotel, 3 general stores, 3 carpenters, a blacksmith shop, and a doctor's office. The nascent community sent several soldiers to the front during the Civil War, including Augustus and Frederick Fisher, whose correspondence survives in the Elmhurst History Museum's collections to this day. As the war came to a close, Cottage Hill continued its growth. And with that growth came a movement to change the name of the community itself. Several locals had led an effort to beautify the largely barren landscape by planting more than 1,000 elm trees. Thomas Barber Bryan led the charge to recognize that effort by dubbing the community Elmhurst. In 1868, locals voted to formally change the name. Then they waffled, fell back on the name of Cottage Hill in 1869, and finally formally accepted the change to Elmhurst in 1870. Now, during this span, the community's business district continued to expand and flourish. The Graue store became the community's first brick building and was soon followed by others. Between the late 1850s and the 1880s, we began to see the rise of grand country estates, with Chicago business leaders taking advantage of the train line to site magnificent homes in our community. Among them were Seth and Elizabeth Wadhams, owners of the Knickerbocker Ice Company in Chicago. The Wadhams built a grand home, which they dubbed White Birch, adding many stately elms to the treeless lot. Aurelia Case King and Thomas Wilder later called the mansion home, and it would be repurposed as the Wilder Mansion at Wilder Park in the 20th century. Lucian and Lavila Hagens built their grand estate Hawthorne during this period. Lavila Hagens was a particularly interesting new resident arriving from Pennsylvania. She founded the Women's Temperance Publication Association, which published the Union Signal, and was a founder of the Wheeling Children's Home. Now, among the grand estates was Bird's Nest, located on the south side of St. Charles Road between York Street and Cottage Hill Avenue. Bird's Nest was the home of Chicago attorney Thomas Barber Bryan and his wife, Jane Bird Bryan. The Bryans played an important role in the community's history in the 1870s, donating land for German Proseminary, a school designed to train young men for the ministry and careers in parochial education. The Melancton Proseminary was formally established in 1871 and was modeled on the German gymnasium system, with students ranging in age from 14 to 18. The initial body of 28 students formally studying in January of 1872 would grow quickly, and 2 new buildings, including Old Main, would need to be built before the end of the first decade, laying the foundation for what would become Elmhurst University. The Bryans contributed to other major developments in Chicago and Elmhurst. Thomas represented Chicago in 1890 at the Committee of the U.S. Senators deciding the site of the Columbian Exposition, and was appointed as Commissioner at Large for the World's Fair. He visited the crowned heads of Europe to drum up support for the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and he and Jane hosted the foreign commissioners at Bird's Nest here in Elmhurst in 1893. Another notable resident of Elmhurst at this time was Henry L. Glos. The grandson of early German immigrants in the area, he was born in 1851 and married Lucy in 1876. He worked as a teacher and grocer before becoming a real estate broker, tax investor, and banker. Glos led the charge to formally incorporate Elmhurst as a village in 1882, standing for election and serving as the first village president. Now, Henry and Lucy built their grand home just south of Park Avenue in 1892 at a kingly sum of $50,000. In later years, the Glosses willed the estate to the community to serve the public good. It functioned as a war rations office during World War II before serving as City Hall. Today, it is home to the Elmhurst History Museum. A year after the community's incorporation, 2 businessmen, Adolf Hammerschmidt and Henry Osman, established the Elmhurst-Chicago Stone Company, mining stone from an 11-acre parcel acquired from Louis Graue. The quarry furnished stone blocks for foundations and crushed stone for area roads. In 1992, DuPage Stormwater Management acquired the quarry and repurposed it for floodwater control. However, the Elmhurst-Chicago Stone Company still maintains operations nearby, serving as the oldest continually operating business in Elmhurst. The 1880s also saw the establishment of Elmhurst Public School, later renamed Hawthorne School. Built in 1888, the school hosted grades 1 through 8, as well as a few high school classes. A separate building would be added in 1905 to serve as a high school. Between 1884 and 1885, the village of Elmhurst began to see modern touches, including the installation of lamps and sidewalks. A wave of improvements followed in the 1890s, including installation of electric power in 1892, sewer pipes in 1893, the establishment of a volunteer fire department in 1893, and installation of the first telephone line in 1897. As the 20th century dawned, we saw the first of what would become 3 business districts on firm footing in a rapidly modernizing town. The 20th century also brought new amusements, including a 70-acre golf course with a state-of-the-art clubhouse designed by architect Walter Burley Griffin. The clubhouse hosted dinners, dances, parties, and fireworks for the growing community. Perhaps the greatest instigator for explosive growth in the 20th century was the arrival of the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin light electric rail line. Incorporated in 1902, the CA&E sited 3 stops to the south, giving rise to the Spring Road and Villette business districts. The CA&E also touched off a new wave of home construction that continued until the Great Depression. Between 1902 and 1929, Elmhurst tripled in size and the population grew by a factor of 7. With growth came the need for modernization. The community reincorporated as a city in 1910 with an elected mayor and aldermen serving distinct wards. As the population grew, new community organizations rose, including the Elmhurst Women's Club, which was established in 1913, and the Elmhurst Boy Scouts, established in 1914. 1914 also saw the establishment of the Lindlahr Sanitarium, founded by Dr. Henry Lindlahr, a German immigrant. Lindlahr founded his health clinic on the concept of the nature cure similar to William Kellogg's Battle Creek establishment. The complex covered 8 acres south of St. Charles Road. More than 80,000 patients took the nature cure, which stressed fresh air, exercise, sunbathing, and a strict vegetarian diet. By 1916, Elmhurst's first library opened in the Glos block, originally constructed by Henry Glos in 1894. The library boasted 830 books and was open 10 hours a week. When the United States entered World War I, Elmhurst answered the call to arms. 3 of our sons did not return. Ernest Timrott, Richard Hintz, and Kinsley Buck would give the last full measure of devotion. The Elmhurst American Legion, T.H.B. post, established in 1919, would immortalize their initials in its name. That same year saw the foundation of Elmhurst's first Girl Scout troop. And the following year, construction was completed on York High School, a state-of-the-art school for a modern community. As we approached the Roaring 20s, the tree-lined streets showed a maturing community ready for change. To aid with modernization, business leaders created the Elmhurst Booster Club, which advocated for paved streets, playgrounds, new equipment to fight fires, and better wages for teachers. The Booster Club would become today's Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce. The 1920s also saw the establishment of the Elmhurst Park District, with Wilder Park providing much-needed green space in 1921. The following year, the growing Elmhurst Public Library moved to Wilder Mansion on the property. Elmhurst also entered the age of aviation in the 1920s, with the creation of its own airport. Founded in 1923 and formally incorporated in 1929, the Elmhurst Airport was located on the north side, bounded by Lake, Grand, Church, and 83. The site primarily served to train pilots and expanded operations to training search and rescue teams during World War II. The airport failed to stave off a right-of-way for a power line in 1956 and closed in 1957. Today, much of Elmhurst Industrial Park occupies this space. The 1920s also saw seismic changes at Elmhurst Proseminary. H. Richard Niebuhr transformed the school into a modern college by 1924. Elmhurst College, now Elmhurst University, celebrated its sesquicentennial in 2021, a testament to the vision of the original founders and the dedicated staff, students, and alums. Modern entertainment reached the citizens of Elmhurst with the construction of the York Theater in 1924. The theater got its current Art Moderne update in 1939 and continues to serve the community nearly a century after it opened. The 1920s also saw the creation of a modern police department and the construction of Elmhurst Hospital in 1926. Elmhurst was home to a few celebrities at this time as well, including Carl Sandburg, who moved to Elmhurst in 1919 and lived here until 1928. Sandburg won his first Pulitzer Prize while living here, and during his time in Elmhurst, worked as a reporter for the Chicago Daily News, as well as published 4 volumes of poetry, wrote the Rutabaga Story for Children's, collected the Great American Song Bag, and wrote Lincoln the Prairie Years. His typewriter is a prized artifact in the Elmhurst History Museum's collection today. Labor leader and presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs briefly called Elmhurst home as well in the 1920s. The architect of the Pullman Railroad strike came to Elmhurst in the 20s to regain his health at the Lindlahr Sanitarium and died here in 1926. While we're on the subject of local literary and cultural figures, it should be noted that Elmhurst has a long tradition serving as a cradle of the arts and boasted several artists of considerable talent. Lee Sturgis trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of Design and the School of the Art Institute. A successful businessman, he held 20 patents to his name, but today is best remembered for his high-quality etchings. The Elmhurst History Museum holds more than 500 of his etchings in its collection. Carolyn Wade moved to Elmhurst at age 6 in the 1860s. She took advantage of Elmhurst's proximity to Chicago to train at the Art Institute before studying abroad at the Académie Colarossi in Paris. She would go on to teach watercolors and oil painting at the School of the Art Institute, served as a charter member of the Palette Club, served as president of the Art Students League of Chicago, and had her work featured in the Fine Arts Palace in Illinois building at the Columbian Exposition of 1893. Award-winning artist Eleanor King Hookham also called Elmhurst home. Known especially for her drawings and paintings involving ink and coffee, Hookham founded the Artists Guild in 1946 and the Fine Arts Civic Foundation in 1974. She would also be a driving force behind the establishment of the celebrated Elmhurst Art Museum. Though the Great Depression brought a temporary halt to new housing construction, Elmhurst saw a number of interesting developments in the 1930s. These included the establishment of the Veterans of Foreign Wars Walter A. Glos Post in 1931, and the creation of Camp Elmhurst, a civilian conservation corps facility built in 1934. Now, despite hard times, the community of Elmhurst staged an enormous Centennial Celebration in 1936 with pageants, parades, and a charity boxing match to draw visitors from surrounding towns and cities. The Centennial Celebration was a boon to local businesses, although there's some question as to the historical veracity of choosing 1836 as Elmhurst's founding year. 1938 saw the establishment of the American Association of University Women, which is still an active community organization today. Now, World War II saw the community rally to serve the nation's needs on the home front and abroad. The Glos Mansion served as a war rations office, and locals led grease drives, scrap drives, paper drives, sold war bonds, conducted civilian defense drills, while overseas, the city of Elmhurst and Elmhurst University saw many of their finest answer the nation's call to arms. Here we see a photograph of First Lieutenant Richard Fellows, who served in the Army Air Corps and was killed in action over France in 1944. Now, as Elmhurst entered the post-war period, the community saw changes both good and bad. On the bright side, the Elmhurst YMCA was established, serving local families, which first opened its doors in 1952 and still very much with us today. Another bright spot was the Elm Roller Rink, which began welcoming skaters in 1956 and served as one of the suburb's most celebrated rinks until it closed its doors in 1989. On the downside, the 50s saw the arrival of the devastating Dutch elm disease, taking out countless mature trees and changing the landscape of Elmhurst. In the 1960s, Elmhurst established an industrial park, attracting light manufacturing to the community. A number of local sportsmen in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond helped put Elmhurst on the map too. Among them, York High School cross country and track coach Joe Newton would certainly make his mark, serving from 1956 until 2016, a whopping 50 years. Under his leadership, York High School won 28 Illinois cross country titles and 1 state track title. Newton himself would be named National Cross Country Coach of the Year 4 times and would serve as assistant manager to the marathon team for the 88 Olympics. He is the subject of a documentary, The Long Green Line. Local social studies teacher, bicyclist, and travel enthusiast J. Hart Rosdale entered the history books by capturing the title of the world's most traveled man in Ripley's Believe It or Not, eclipsing Robert Ripley himself. Rosdale held the title from 1967 until his death in 1977, traveling 1.5 million miles, many with his beloved secondhand bicycle, which he dubbed Jacqueline. By the time of his death in 1977, he had visited every nation on Earth with the exception of North Korea, North Vietnam, and French Antarctica. In the world of racing, Fred Lorenzen became one of the first Northerners to enter the largely Southern sport of NASCAR in the 1960s. Known as Fearless Freddie, the Golden Boy, and the Elmhurst Express, Lorenzen became the first Northerner to win a NASCAR championship and the first to complete the NASCAR Grand Slam. He was recently inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame as one of NASCAR's 50 greatest drivers of all time. The 60s also saw Elmhurst involved in the civil rights movement. In 1965, Elmhurst residents joined Elmhurst College students and faculty in a sympathy march in coordination with the Selma to Montgomery Civil Rights March. The following year, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would give an address at Elmhurst College. The 70s and 80s saw a period of decline and tremendous challenges. Between 1970 and 1980, the population dropped and development shifted west along I-88 and 290 corridors. Flooding would compound the community's problems. Flooding in 1972 disrupted the community. Record flooding in 1987 required assistance from the National Guard and the American Red Cross. Against this tide, positive developments would lead to a turnaround in the decades to come. Major public works projects, such as construction of the Robert Palmer Underpass, alleviated traffic headaches at the railroad crossing that bisects York Street, while new stormwater projects began addressing flooding. The 90s saw Elmhurst gaining new growth and a new head of steam. Following the purchase of the McCormick House, designed by Mies van der Rohe in 1991, the movement to establish the Elmhurst Art Museum gained traction. The house was moved to what is now the museum campus, and the Elmhurst Art Museum opened its doors in 1997. It will be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year and is a major contributor to the community's cultural life. Against this backdrop, the 90s saw a period of renewal in the community as a whole. Creative use of TIF districts, paving projects, upgraded lighting, facade grants, parking decks, and a host of other strategies began to turn things around. A renewed interest in high-density housing and key business districts to support local merchants has brought the community roaring back to life. Today, Elmhurst boasts a population of more than 45,000, and the community is poised for growth as we look to the future. I hope you enjoyed today's program. If you'd like to know more, please visit our award-winning exhibit, by all accounts, on the second floor of the Elmhurst History Museum. You can also visit our website to enjoy documentaries and historical articles on local topics. Please consider supporting the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation, the nonprofit fundraising arm of the Elmhurst History Museum, which helps underwrite our exhibits and programs such as this. Finally, please join me in thanking our exhibit sponsors for the 2022 season. They are our platinum level sponsor, Feezy Roofing, our silver level sponsors, Community Bank of Elmhurst, Guaranteed Rate, John Nolden, Lakeside Bank, Michael V. Cicero, Attorney at Law, Superior Ambulance, and Sereno, Romello, and Durkin. Our bronze level sponsor, Ken Bartels Consulting, our friend level sponsors, House of Glass, My Car Wash, Weiss, Coons and Oliver, and Mike's Meat Market. We greatly appreciate your support. I hope to see you at the Elmhurst History Museum soon, and thanks for joining us.